Now we're talking about racism today. And I want to begin by saying I've talked on this subject several times over my years here in Sacramento. And one time after the end of the lesson, a black educator in our church came up to me and said, "You know, there is only one race." And I said, well, certainly that's in our spiritual approach, that's true. She said, "That is true, physically." And I thanked her for that insight. And then I had to review inside myself, oh, now, wait a minute. I was very carefully taught that there are 5 distinct races. And I took a poll at the first service, and I want to take a poll at this service. How many of you, and I'm realizing, as young people, when we hear this, we don't labor over every detail and all. So when I say, I don't know what I was taught by the teachers, I only know what I heard. And what I generally heard is, there are 5 distinct races. It wasn't taught with prejudice or anything, it was just taught that way. How many of you grew up with the thought, there are 5 basic distinct races? Put up your hands if you did. Yeah, you can see it. Interesting, isn't it? That the majority of us came started our lives out with that kind of intellectual preparation. So I thought a good place to begin is by going to the trusty Groyer computer encyclopedia. And first of all, I want to read you what it says about race. The species Homo, and I'm not the whole thing, I got 4 pages here, just little bits of it. The species Homo sapiens is not difficult for specialists to identify, nor is there difficulty in determining its constituent populations, those groups of human beings who inhabit the various areas of the earth. No such clear-cut agreement is possible in determining the nature of subspecies or races, and many, probably most scientists today, reject the concept of race. Other scientists use the race concept as an expedient shorthand expression for variance in anatomical traits exhibited by the populations of broad geographic homelands. Even in this geographic sense, however, the term race must be understood to have value only as a general term without precise definition. Gene flow among the homelands was great enough to preserve an essential biochemical and intellectual equality between the emerging human races, and evolutionary improvements such as speech, intelligence, and manual dexterity were spread throughout the species. The gene flow has been so pervasive that our species has never developed pure races in any meaningful genetic sense. One last one on race. Work is being done today on certain genes present throughout the world in many populations, rather than in only one population, to investigate genetic adaptation to the conditions and the requirements of various environments. Such studies show race as a constantly evolving process. I love this because I believe it. It's a constantly evolving process, rather than as static, immutable division of Homo sapiens into rigidly bounded groups. Then we tap our little keys and we get racism. And so let me remind you of what most of us understand about racism. It says, racism refers to any theory or doctrine stating that inherited physical characteristics such as skin color, facial features, hair texture, and the like determine behavior patterns, personality traits, or intellectual abilities. In practice, racism typically takes the form of a claim that some human races are superior to others, an abuse of the concept of differences among peoples. It has contributed to prejudice and discrimination among groups in many parts of the world. And then speaking about racism, in the same spirit as we heard about race, it says, the overwhelming bulk of scientific opinion in both the social and biological sciences, however, now rejects the notion that large human populations, such as the so-called white, black, and yellow races, behave differently because of their physical appearance, or that they can be said to be genetically superior or inferior to one another. Genetic differences between population groups do exist, of course. None of these group differences, however, has yet been shown to affect personality, intelligence, or indeed any ability that significantly relates to social behavior. And then when it comes to causes, there could be volumes, but they just simply say the causes of racism are complex and cannot be reduced to a single factor. Rapid social change often fosters racism. Racism, in short, is frequently an irrational reaction to a real or perceived threat to the status quo. A reaction to a real or perceived threat to the status quo. So we begin on the note that unquestionably there is no rational support for racism. I also think I forgot to say at the second service, and I'll say it again here today at the second service, there is no religious support for any prejudice against a sexual group from the Bible or for the racists. It is used often to do that, but the Bible can be used to prove anything. All you have to do is to take something in a text that does not call for that kind of support of the teaching of Jesus Christ, which the Bible is used for. But quite often, Old Testament little words are drawn out that would suggest an inferiority, and by some even a superiority of a group. But most Bible scholars would not support that at all, and certainly no metaphysical Bible scholar would accept that at all. So, intellectually, we start our discussion on racism by realizing there is no intellectual support for thoughts of racism, but we have them. We have them. And the reason that we have them is, as we said last week, the only way you're ever free from anything, when you've been carefully taught certain things, is to move from your head to your heart with that truth. Just as I said in golf, the only way you can keep from looking up from when you go to hit that ball is to practice, practice, practice till you get in the heart, or what we call the unconscious, that then just rules your body without any thought. You'll keep your head down. And so when it gets to the heart, that we know the truth, the reality of the situation in terms of racial thoughts, only then can we be free of racism. When we talk about unity and racism, it brings us to a validation of what should be in our heart. And as we said each week as we talked about these issues, it begins with the simple and basic concept that underlies everything we teach in unity. We are not body beings, we are spiritual beings. You say, whoa, this guy just keeps saying that over and over. But so does the coach keep saying, keep your head down, keep your head down, keep your head down. You go right out on the course and go, you got to keep your head down. You've got to know I am not a physical being, I'm a spiritual being. I was not born at birth, I will not die at death. This is a physical experience. This dear body is a vehicle of my being. When you apply that understanding to the body, then you begin to move into the concept of something I thought of before the first service this morning. I was out walking McGregor, and I watched people driving up. And I noted as people drove up, some got out of their pickup trucks. Some got out of some old Fords. Some got out of Buicks. Cadillacs went by. Might have seen an Edsel, but I'm not sure. And you know, I never once thought, and I suggest that none of you would think, as those people then parked, got out of the car, did I think, ew, there comes a Ford person. Or there's a Cadillac person. Most of us are totally free from connecting the value and the worth of the human being from the car. Questionnaires do show that people tend to respond to people who get out of Cadillacs and Jaguars and to give them a little more room as if they were power beings. But that's only because a lot of people haven't thought about it, and they would know that at least 50%, maybe higher, the people who drive those automobiles live in little bitty apartments, and all their money goes into driving those automobiles. And so you learn, I don't grant anybody power because of the car they drive. So anyway, most of us don't do that. But again, we have looked at bodies and we make judgments, which comes into the area of racism. And the reason for that comes back to a spirituality as a basic issue. Because, you see, when we do not know that we are spiritual beings, and that, like the song we sang in the beginning, which doesn't make any sense on a literal sense, God is love, and I live in that love. It doesn't make sense unless you know I'm a spiritual being. And God is this incredible spiritual dimension, which is beyond comprehension. And I am somehow having my being in that dimension as a spiritual being. Therefore, I'm always in God's love, God's help. Very difficult to say that and feel it in your heart if you think of yourself just as a physical being, if you're sick and saying, I am engulfed in God's health, I am in God's health. But if you realize as a spiritual being, you're always in the presence of wholeness. The more you know that as a spiritual being, the more your body can pick it up then, you see. So, as a spiritual being, we are able to recognize our oneness with God and God's nature, which is another basic concept. And in that comes all our value and worth. And therefore, if I know that in my heart, not just my head, I cannot be threatened because another person looks at me and says, out of the way, whatever, Mexican, white boy, whatever. I can't be moved that. I can smile back because I know who I am. I'm a spiritual being. I'm not this body. And I cannot be put down by where I happen to be walking in space and time with my body temple. So, Unity's answer to that is, find the reality of your being, which not only free you from the insecurities that make you want to respond to racist thoughts, but it also frees you from having racist thoughts because you don't need to claim your space by putting other people down. It's as simple as that. You remember what it said in the Grolier there? It said, under causes of racism, it says, it seems to be connected to social unrest and movement. And if you look back through history, you can see it just A, B, C. You can see that, for instance, when the Irish had their famine and the potato crops failed and everything, and they all came to the United States, who was the scapegoat of the social unrest that happened? They came and took all the cheap jobs. I mean, they were willing to work for anything. And so they started putting people out of work. So what happened? Those Irish, they are awful. And I mean, they just heaped all kinds of abuse on them. And it's just followed through in time. The minority groups who are a threat in any way to the status quo, as Grolier said again, then they arouse in people their own insecurities. Their own insecurities. And it's called their power position, but what's a power position? It's insecurity. You don't need power if you know who you are. You take your stand on who you are, not what you control. So, Unity's answer, again, is to racism is knowing the truth of our being. We are spiritual beings. We are one with God and God's nature, and we are one with each other. Intellectually, most of us as metaphysicians have got it. But now we've got to get it into our hearts so that all of our practical movements of life come from this basis. That's our call, that's our challenge, is to make what we experience here on Sundays and we can feel so really carry it out into our practical everyday living. We need to use all the tools we can to help us in that. Those of you who have taken our membership meeting know that, for instance, when it comes to business, your business life, we tell you it is important to be a tither. Why should you be a tither? Do you have to be a tither to belong to the church? No, we don't require anything like that. We just say to you, you don't belong in this church if you don't have these basic concepts that I'm a spiritual being and God's nature and potential within me. You belong somewhere else. But if you have that, there are no requirements on you. You don't have to stop drinking. You don't have to stop carousing. You don't have to do any of that. We tell you it'll all probably get you in trouble if you keep on. It is not the best use of God's wisdom. But we do not legislate for you. That's my point. And we don't legislate tithing. But why do we encourage tithing? Because it is a tool that comes to you in the most challenging of vulnerability in people's lives, which is money. And it says, do you believe God is your partner in everything you do? If you do, then you will freely take 10% of your offering, which is enough to hurt, and you will give it back to the source of your spiritual inspiration, to God. It's that simple. Nobody upstairs is watching you if you don't. So tithing is a tool. And I think that's clear that I say you need a tool in this business of racism either. And the answer is love, of course, a recognition of our one with each other. But as a tool, the one I like best, and I pull out when I find myself having a problem with this, is just using the word brother and sister. Brother and sister. And some of our religious groups have used this the black people have used this a great deal, and standing together, pulling together. It does. Brother, sister, pulls you together. And so, again, in passing, if you want a tool to help you remind you of oneness, get in the habit. If you don't want to say it all the time, you may not want to say to your boss, thanks, brother, or something like that. But you can think in your mind, my brother, my sister, especially when you're being challenged and moved, you feel yourself feeling vulnerable by someone, wait a minute, there's my brother, there's my sister. And it puts everything in a different context. The importance of our spirituality is heightened by our sense of reincarnation, as we talked about last week. And that is part of our metaphysics, though it is not something you have to accept to believe the first premises we've talked about, but it adds to it in that it is clear for most of us who think reincarnation explains much of the inequities in life, the reasons why we are who we are, sexually, racially, otherwise, is that we make conscious or unconscious, like most of our choices are unconscious. I just love this story. I got to squeeze it in here by talking fast. One of the couple going out had moved to Denver. They were just loving Denver when suddenly they were transferred back here. Now, they love the church, but they like Denver a lot. I put that in because I said, when you write this up, you've got to put that part in. You loved coming back to your church. But in any event, they were in Denver, and they really resisted. They knew they were going to come back, but the time got shortened there. And so they were sort of resistant in themselves that they were being brought back early. They said, do you know that in the rental equipment we got for moving our furniture, the truck didn't break down once. It broke down different truck broke down 5 times. 5 times. And then it dawned on them, suddenly realized it was just acting out their resistance to the move. Life is so responsive, it just feeds back to us what it is that we're thinking. Now, see, where was that? We have now back into choosing our life role. And I said most of our choices are at an unconscious level. They didn't begin by consciously thinking, we resist moving, so we're going to make that truck have problems. It'll stretch out the trip. They didn't do that at all. Unconsciously, however, they impacted the trip by thinking, we really don't want to go. So it came out that way with their trucks. You and I think, conscious or unconscious, we choose our roles in this life. And when you are able to accept that and know that, wherever you are, whatever you're experiencing as a majority group, a minority group, as we're talking about racism today, whatever, we are on target for what it is our own soul is having to work out. For those of us who are learning to make our spirituality practical and real, we cannot be racist, we cannot be vindictive. We have to become leaders wherever we are, in small groups or in big groups, in terms of the betterment of our world and an affirmation of our brotherhood. And great examples of this, of course, are Gandhi and Martin Luther King, who made statements in the world, but made it in a spirit of love. Our spirituality helps us to know our own self-worth and value, as I've already said. There was an article that came out in U.S. News and World Report right after the O.J. Simpson trial, and it was all on races, the concept of races and racism. And in it was a very, very challenging word for all of us in this country. Some of you know this. I knew sort of about it, but I didn't know it to this extent. It said that 10 years ago, 1 in every 4 young black males was either in jail, in prison, or on parole. Today, that number is 1 out of every 3. Now, I don't know the age group when they say young black males, but let's say they're probably talking 16 to 20-something. And of course, we all hear those figures and we realize that is horrific. And something needs to be done. In that same magazine, there was another article that affirmed something I affirmed last week. And I did it in the spirit of talking about our sexism. And I was talking about the need to reinforce the home. You all have been very good to me, by the way. I invited you to be good to me because I said when you talk on an issue like this, you can't cover everything in 25 minutes. So be kind to me. And I haven't got too many letters. But I did get one letter last week about suggesting that a lot of crime was because we, in our new sexual roles, had not been able to really fulfill parenting for children the way it should have been. And they said that there were they certainly felt that their children and other children grew up to be free from crime and all the rest without always having a parent right there doing that, because there were other such wonderful role models in teaching, etc. And I just want to go on record and say, I agree that is a possibility. But the statistics show that's not real in terms of all people. And the article in U.S. News World Report said, most researchers are saying the greatest cause for those figures I just gave you is because of the breakdown of the family life for black families, in that it often is one breadwinner who has to work hard and cannot fulfill that role of parenting. The need for constant, not only love and nurturing, but supervision and discipline, which is the key that children have to grow up with. They can't just take off when they want to at night and nobody knows where they are. They can't avoid all the temptations and the challenges and the peer pressure and all the rest. So, in our consciousness, we have to direct our prayer support for the healing of this situation. As you pray, I want you to know with me that God works in paradoxical ways. Very important. I think we understand this. I found myself thinking about war. We know that war is not of God, it's of human littleness. Yet it's very interesting that war has contributed to some of the greatest advancements that humans have made. And when we talk about racism, it has made a great contribution to what advancement we have made in racism. And as those of us who know, from my experience of having served twice, I know what it does to break barriers down. When I was manager of the football team, I had some of the hardest redneck characters from the South you have ever seen. I think I've told you, I'll never forget this one guy. Before every football game, he'd sit and pound his head against the lockers just to get ready to go out and kill somebody. Well, these folks had never had a close relationship with someone with black skin. There were plenty in the South, but they had not had any close. They had their prepared conscience. It was wonderful to see how the years we lived together and worked together and struggled to win the games and all the rest, how that all melted away under some help from some of us, to melt that down. For those who served, in quotes, on the front lines, as we've often said, there is no separation on the front line, just brother. So where is that paradox for us? Well, I suggest to you there's another paradox going on, and if you don't hear anything else I say, I think this is one of the most important. The paradox is that today, one of the most powerful movements in our world and in this nation is the uprising of fundamentalist religious groups, both in the Christian church and in the Muslim church. And they are having tremendous value, a powerful role, because they are doing what I said in unity we don't do. And I acknowledge that. We don't do this. They tell people, their followers, how they will live. You will not drink. You will not, what are other bad things we do? I don't know. They just tell you, I suddenly gone blank. But anyway, they tell you what you can't do. They tell you, you will tithe. And they tell you all these things. And from that standpoint, I would say, and the role they also take, along with the feeling that the leadership can do that to other human beings, comes the same thought, that our message is the right message, and without this message, you cannot be saved or go to heaven or the promised land or wherever, because you are different. And until you get with us, you are different. So it is a divisive teaching. Paradoxically, however, it is so timely in our nation today. So timely. Because they tend to give people a direction that is so needed, and when the young people become involved, it tends to, in quotes, save them from the overwhelming influences that are out there in the world at this time in which we are breaking into so many new stratas of freedom. Tomorrow, as many of you know, there is going to be a march. I don't know how big it'll be. I can only say it is going to have a tremendous impact upon our nation. And it is being led in the consciousness of affirming the dignity of the black male, primarily, and a call to them to take their place as fathers and to give value to their lives. This is a tremendous call. And many a person is responding to this call, not because they are Muslim or a follower of the leader of this call, but because they want that to be true. I do too. And so should every one of us in this room. But it is easy, you see, to flip onto the other side. And many people at first service said this, oh boy, I needed that reminder. To flip on the other side and be so filled up in our thinking with what are the politics of the leader of this? What's really going on here, etc., etc. Well, you and I need to take our role into the spiritual dimension again, and to know that as we look back to see God has led us through every means and fashion to a gradual growth in our spirituality and to our brotherhood and sisterhood. We may seem far apart, it's only because we're more conscious of it, but we are closer today than we have ever been in this world of ours, and we're going to get closer. But our part is to trust the divine order of God's plan and not fall into the trap again of being either racist or just plain critical, so that we give negative energy to what's moving. If we take our stand in our spirituality in the call of freedom that eventually every human soul must walk in his own inner sense of dignity, and that nobody gives him by saying you belong to this group and now you can stand up with dignity, if we take our stand and just know that and radiate it wherever we are with the truth of that. Now, if we're wrong, we're wrong. But I don't think we're wrong. With the truth of that, we will have the universe on our side, and I say God will work even through these paradoxical situations to bring forth what we all seek. But we must do our work. So I give thanks that in closing today, that you do value this wonderful realization you have of our spirituality, our oneness with God's nature, and our oneness with each other. There are no inequities in potential in our expression. And we're not fooled by appearances. We have to deal with appearances. Some of us do like Jaguars better than Fords. In looking at them, you see. But we value them as, in their essence, as transportation. And so some of us don't like people who are 6'4", especially if you're a man 5'2" and dealing with women. It's a little impressive. But you understand what I mean. We are not moved by that, and no man is put down by that if he knows who he is as a spiritual being, and that he's looking up at another spiritual being. Well, I just get going. I got to stop. Let's close your eyes and feel together again this heart sense as we close our eyes that is bigger than all our intellectualizing of our oneness in God. And we feel the peace that comes from it, of not being moved by thoughts of insecurity and fear and anxiety. God is our security. God is the fulfillment of all our needs. And in the strength and the power of that, we grant love to everyone. And we give everybody room to be themselves. Thank you, God, for the freedom and the power of knowing the truth of our being and our oneness in you. Amen.